Okay, today we'll continue with the, come on, this one, civilization. I think this is Rome. So I think there is a lot of the political system that Rome had adopted had evolved into today's political system. So it's worth looking at Rome by itself. So today we'll only concentrate on Rome. Start with the ancient Rome. Rome go through the process of being a kingdom and then becomes an republic, and then eventually becomes an empire. So it goes through all the three political systems. The ancient Rome is the Roman civilization from the founding of the Italian city Rome at about 8th century BC until the collapse of the Western Rome Empire in about the 5th century AD. So it lasts quite a long, 1,300 years. It is about almost 3,000 years ago, 2,000 something, or almost 3,000 years ago. Okay. And so, as I said, it comprises of the kingdom period, which lasts about 200 years, 250 years, and then the empire period, which, the republic period, which is about 500 years, and then finally the empire period, about 200 years. So you go through a transformation. So we don't know whether today's politics will be something similar to the evolution of the Roman Empire. Whether today a lot of countries which call themselves republic have evolved to become empire, and then we can also look at the collapse of the empire, the proper cause. Of course, nobody can be sure, because afterward it is history. So we can analyze history, but we can never do a scientific test to see whether a particular factor is the dominant factor or not. So we will have a look. Of course,
so what is an empire really?
Yeah, what is empire is really an interesting argument, isn't it? I think the empire, in certain sense, it means that a country is trying to exert its influence on the other countries in a progressively more dominant role. It's getting bigger and bigger and having more and more influence. And sometimes the influence may be coercion by force, and sometimes maybe other means. So that is probably a definition of empire.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay. And like any civilization, they have a founding myth. So the Roman kingdom also have a founding myth, some kind of king, almost divine. So according to the founding myth of the Rome, the city was founded in, very accurate, 21st April 733 BC on the banks of the river by a twin brother who descended from a certain prince and grandson of So I think somehow it related to the Roman god of war, and so they are half divine. So almost like all myths, usually the initial kings or the one who established a civilization will have some divine characteristics. So it's no stranger here. And then a little bit of arguments whether there's help from nature. For example, in this case, from a she-wolf save them, and then when they go in love, go back to becomes a throne. I think that almost like all kingdoms, there is a myth like that. So, and then a little bit of oral history, nobody's exactly clear what's happening, and then as a little bit of political things, and then established what they consider that they are their kingdom, the first few kings. So I'm not particularly interested in all these myths. I'm just including this as part of the story. So the city of Rome grew from settlements around the river Tiber and then crossroad of traffic and trade. According to archaeological evidence, the village of Rome was probably founded sometime in the 8th century BC. Though it may go back as far as 10th century BC by members of a Latin tribe of Italy on the top of the Palatine Hill. So obviously some kind of geographic importance is always there to form a city, and then around the city, power start to develop. So it looks like it is developed through because it is at some point in traffic and trade. So people get around in that area to do trade, and then eventually that grow into cities, people permanently staying there, and then getting a lot of interactions among people, and then develop their skills, specialization, and so forth and so forth. So quite a standard evolution here. And then a group of people who had previously settled in the north seem to have established a political control in the region by about the 7th BC, forming a aristocratic and the monarchical elites. So there is always an elite group gaining control, and then the elite group apparently lost power by the 6th century BC. At this point, the original Latin and the Sabine groups reinvented the government by creating a republic with much greater restraints on the ability of rulers to exercise power. So that is quite similar to what happened in the last 300 years in Europe. Before that, it was ruled by king, and then somehow people revolved and then establish a republic with a very strong emphasis on the limiting the rulers' ability to exercise power. So the Roman tradition and logical evidence point to a complex within the Forum Romanum as the seat of power for the king and the beginnings of the religious center there as well. Now, again, it is very interesting to observe that in the European and almost in the rest of the world, the political power is very much involved with religion as well. So here, Rome is no exception here. It has a beginning of the religious centers. The use of religion, I think, is two sides of the same thing. Sometimes religion helps to control people, but at other times the religion becomes a force to rebel against the political power. And somebody, Noma Pompilius, I can't pronounce these words, the second king of the Rome succeeded and began Rome's building project with his royal palace in the Virginia and the complex in the Vestal Virgins. Again, very interesting is when somebody got power, usually the power will be reflected upon the civilian by building projects. For example, a palace or some huge monuments and so forth. The king, excluding Romulus, who according to legend held office by virtue of being the city's founder, were all elected by the people of the Rome to serve for life, and none of the kings relying on military force to gain or keep the throne. That is quite interesting. That in a lot of countries, the king is inherited by the previous king. So they will pass through through bloodlines. But looks like here Rome, it had a very different tradition in the sense that the kings are elected by people and it doesn't pass on to its children. And then this is a peaceful evolution, looks like. Therefore, the kings doesn't have to rely on force. But again, the kings are forever until it serves until it dies. So whether it's good or not, we don't know, because a lot of people at the later stage of their life, the cognitive ability might have decreased. Of course, the king always was invested with supreme military, executive, and judicial authorities. So that is the three branches. But unfortunately, today we changed the three branches to the creation of law and the judiciary, the application of law, and then also on execution, how to exercise the power of the government to rule on people. So it looks like here it has a different emphasis. Military is a very important key element. Again, the current Chinese political system is concentrated on the ruling party controlling the army. So here is a very interesting difference of the Chinese political system from our political system here. Our army is not loyal to a specific political party. Our army is loyal to our country. And no matter which party is in power, the army continue to be politically independent. So that is the practice here. And in some Eastern countries, that's not the case. For example, what we have seen in the last few weeks is in Myanmar. You see the to the west, we say, wow, how can a army general overthrow the elected government? To us, it's quite strange, isn't it? Because army is supposed to be independent of political party, and it had to obey the ruling party's orders. But in their case, it's not. Their constitution say no. The army is independent of the political party, but is above the political party rather than under the political party. So when the army thinks the political party is not serving the interest of the country, then they will rule that the party is not legitimate, and then overthrow it and want to have another election. So of course, in our view, that's very undemocratic. But again, whether a democratic is the only political structure is subject to argument. Okay, is whether a democratic countries is the best form of government. Again, subject to discussion. Again, here for the Miami, their military is above the political party rather than under. In our case here, for example, Australia, the military should be under the political power or the parliament, whatever that is. But in China, the case is even strange because the People's Liberation Army, PLA, belongs to the Communist Party. So again, now in this case, the party owns the military, owns the so-called coercion power, the power to actually force people into compliance, whether using it internally or externally. The military power is owned by the party, and therefore no other party owning an army can overthrow the party. So there are many different variations of this political system. That's where I want to emphasize in this talking about civilization is there are multiple ways to run the country. It's not a unique way. Whether it's good or not always depends on the circumstances. So in here, in the Roman kingdom, the king is given the supreme military authority. So the king is above everything. He is above political party and he is the top. And all this power all concentrated into one single, sorry, I take this call first, sorry. Hello? Yes, who's calling? Sorry, I'm on a conference at the moment, so I in about 3 hours, 3 hours later. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Bye. Sorry. So again, the king is given all the power, and he has the power to appoint and nominate all officials. So the power is all concentrated within one person, although that person was elected into power at the death of the last king. So I think, to my knowledge, this is quite unique among other kingdoms. For example, in Europe, after the Roman kingdom, all these little countries, their kings are inherited along the bloodline, just like Britain at the moment. After Queen Elizabeth, hopefully will be King Charles. whether he got a chance, we don't know. It will pass that along bloodline, but here it passed by election. Okay, and the power of this, when the king died, the power of the state would devolve back to the Senate, which was responsible for finding a new king. The Senate would assemble and appoint one of its own members to serve for a period of 5 days with the sole purpose of nominating the next king of Rome. Another member may become this little assembly for another 5 days and continues until a king is found. Once a suitable nominee to the kingship, he would bring the nominee before the Senate, and Senate would review him. If the Senate passed the nominee, then it will convene the assembly and preside over it during the election of the king and so forth. Now, again, this system is quite similar to what the current system of electing the Pope in the Vatican. So when the Pope dies, then all the bishops or archbishops will gather into a little chamber and then discuss until a new Pope is found, and then the Pope is almost like the king, and then it will take the control of the Catholic Church until he dies. So I think almost with the exception of the last Pope, and somehow he resigned, and then Pope Francis take the control, but otherwise it waits for the death of the Pope for the next Pope to be generated. Again, the generation is among a group of people, and then finding a nominee, and then somehow precise or some method of finding the next elect the king or the Pope in this case. Once proposed to the assembly, the people of Rome would either accept or reject him. If accepted, the king-elect did not immediately enter office. 2 other acts had to take place before he was invested with the full power and authority. So it was necessary to obtain the divine will of the gods. How do they do that? We don't know. The second part is had to perform the conferral of the imperium upon the king. So I think the second part is almost like a ceremonial kind of thing. But the first case, we don't know how they obtained the divine will of the gods. According to tradition and later writers, the Roman Republic was established around 509 when the last of the 7 kings of Rome was disposed by another Persian, and a system based on annual elected magistrate and various representative assemblies was established. A constitution set a series of checks and balances and a separation of powers. The most important magistrates are the 2 consuls, who together exercise executive authority such as imperium, military command, and the consuls had to work with the Senate, which was initially an advisory council to the ranking nobility, but grew in size and power. Again, Rome in about 905 BC started to establish the political system which exists almost today. We have, for example, using the British system, we have the lower house and then the upper house. The upper house are mainly the nobles, but the what people who had vested interest in the country. So that form the upper house. And then the lower house is the House of Commons, ordinary people. Here, the Roman Republic started to have this form. So they will have the people called nobles, patricians. And then there's another group of people with a different name, plebeians. That means the lower class. So we have two different classes. And then the lower class form an assembly, the upper class form an assembly, just like we have the lower house and the upper house with Senate. Similar here, we have the house and then we have the Senate. Mm-hmm. But here, because we have no noble in Australia, so the Senate are senators which are elected in a different conditions from the members of parliament in the lower house. But again, some of the members in the Senate are appointed. In the case of United States, in the United Kingdoms, the Senate are formed by the nobles. So again, it's similar here. So, and then we have magistrates of the Republic, include quite a number of different people with different abilities. Originally, the magistrates all related to the upper class, but later open to common people. The Republican voting assemblies include the Centurion Assembly, which vote on the matters of war and peace and elect men to the most important offices. And another one is Tribal Assembly, which elects less important offices. Again, it started to divide the government into different levels. We have the more important government, which manage big issues, the issues about the whole country. And then we have smaller assemblies. So it's now starting to look like what Australia have. We have the federal system, which control everything about Australia. And then we have smaller tribal system, like our state assemblies, state parliaments, about more trivial, not trivial, about lower case things about an area. And again, the Roman society is heavily influenced by the struggle between the different classes. The upper class, usually wealthy people holding land, and the common citizens, which are actually much more numerous than the upper class. Like every country here is same. Always the upper class is has less people, but they usually control much more wealth of the country, much more assets from the country, and therefore they form a special elite group. And so common people and then the wealthy people, the nobles, they might have different views on the way the government is, where the country is advancing. Again, that is reflected both in the Rome Republic as well as today's Republic. There's always a lot of cases like this. Over time, the laws give these upper caste exclusive rights to Rome's highest office. And then it was being repealed and weakened, making the lower caste family becomes full members of the aristocracy. Again, if you are allowing the so-called majority rule, then eventually the majority, that means the lower caste, will eventually take power. But whether that's good or not for the country, again, we will have to depend on circumstances. The leaders of the Republic developed a strong tradition and morality requiring public service, patronage in peace and war, making military and political success intricately linked. So again, this is where the leadership comes in. Leadership usually represents a strong man making strong decisions, including making wars, etc. So the constitution of the Roman Republic was an unwritten set of guidelines and principles passed down mainly through precedents. Again, that started to develop the so-called common law tradition. When the law is practiced, the case becomes a precedent which can be used to justify later judgment. So this is the foundation of common law coming in now. The Senate's ultimate authority derived from the esteem and the prestige of the senators. The Senate passed decrees, and it was officially advised from the Senate to the magistrate. In practice, however, they were usually obeyed by the magistrates. Again, the Senate started to pass laws, and then the laws is applied in real sense into the country, in the community. The legal status of the Roman citizenship initially was very limited and was a vital prerequisite to possessing any important legal rights, such as the right to trial and appeal, to marry, to vote, to hold office, to enter binding contracts, and to special tax exemptions. An adult male citizen with the full complement of the legal and political rights was called the ultimo jura. The ultimo jura elect their assemblies, whereupon the assemblies elected magistrates and add legislations. So the voting rights, this is citizenship in the modern sense. A full citizen has to be a certain condition, but at that time, obviously, full citizenship is not offered to everybody. And so at least you have to be a male. Woman doesn't seem to be able to hold office, and then you have all kinds of rights. So it is limited to so-called the more educated class. And the citizens are organized into centuries, 10 of them, and then Romans like to use the number 10. So centuries and then tribes will gather into their own assemblies. Again, there are lower assemblies, and then eventually join into the bigger assembly to rule the whole country. The Central Assembly was the assembly of centuries. The president of this was usually a council. And this century assembly also will elect the magistrates who have the imperial power, and also elect censors. Rome is another interesting country in the sense that it will make a count of the citizens of the whole country every few years. So only this century assembly can declare war and rectify the results of a census. It also served as the highest court of appeal in certain juridical cases. So now the magistrate is under this council, but today the magistrate passed through its own hierarchy because law becomes much more specialized and professionalized. But in those days, law and then the making of law, etc., all mingle together, and therefore they would delegate their power to judge, to magistrates. But in the last appeal, they will the assembly will still hold that position. But today, our political system had make the assembly not the final appeal courts, because the appeal becomes much more independent and professional. But again, in those days, the political part of the country overrides the judiciary part of the country. But today, of course, we have the independent of the both of them. So our Senate or our House of Commons have to pass law which, if they find it unconstitutional, can be returned to the Senate and the House of Representatives. So today, our judicial system is much powerful than those during the Roman Republic. The Assembly of the Tribes was presided over by a council. Remember, the council was elected by the centuries and was composed of 35 tribes. Again, that is dependent on the size of the country at the moment. The tribes were not ethnic or kinship groups, but rather geographical subdivisions. like here, our states is geographical, doesn't depend on ethnic or kinship relationships. The Barbarian Council, which is the lower house, was identical to the Assembly of the Tribes, but excludes the people from the upper house. So we have to separate the Senate from the lower house now. Okay, back to who can be citizens of Roman Republic. So citizens enjoy a range of privileges and then protections, etc. And the Roman women had a limited form of citizenship. Through held in high regard, they were not allowed to vote or stand for civil or public office. The rich might participate in public life by funding building projects or sponsoring religious ceremonies and other events. Women had the right to own property, to engage in business, and to obtain a divorce, but their legal rights varied over time. Marriages were an important form of political alliance during the Republic. Similar to kinship relationship, so you depends on making bloodline connections in order to secure your political power. Client state or client state citizens would receive a limited form of the Roman citizenship. So citizenships are not one level. They're upper level citizenship who are the Rome's citizens, and then the other states' citizenship. Slaves were considered property and have low legal personhood. Over time, they require a few protection under the law. Some slaves were freed, and then once freed, they faced few barriers beyond normal social stability to participate in Roman society. So when it's a free man, he may have the ability to obtain a Roman citizenship. The principle that a person could become a citizen by law rather than birth was enshrined in the Roman mythology. So again, that is related to some kind of myths. Freed men were former slaves who gained their freedom. They were not automatically given citizenship and lacked some privileges, such as running for executive magistrates and so forth. Children of free men and women were born as free citizens. So that also means slaves, the children from slaves are still slaves. In the late Republic, male slaves who had granted their freedom could become full citizens. So by around 90 BCE, non-Roman allies of Republic also gained full citizenships. So this expanding of rights is also very typical even in today's political system. Remember, I think even in Australia, women can vote. Is that how long ago can women here can vote?
Sorry,
how long ago was the women here can vote?
Oh, right, from Federation.
Since Federation
right.
Here? Is that? But for example, in America, I think the women can vote only about 100 something years ago.
Yeah. No, I think from 1900.
1900, okay.
Yeah. Well, as soon as Federation happened, they were allowed to vote.
Oh, that's good.
I think we were the first country in the world that allowed that. I think
we are. Australia is one of those early countries to allow women to vote.
Mm.
Okay, of course, each magistrate have certain constitutional power. Only the people of Rome had the right to confer this power onto any individual magistrate. So again, limited to a certain group of people. All magistrates had the power of coercion. That means it can use force, such as punishment and so forth. One check on the magistrate's power was his collegiality. That means you have to confer with other similar people. So each magistrate office could be held concurrently by at least 2 people. So we have the majority rule here starting to kick in. Another check is what they call provocatio. It's a primordial form of due process. So any person got a right to be judged in the public by presenting evidence. If any magistrate tried to use the powers of the state against a citizen, that citizen could appeal the decision of the magistrate to a tribunal. In addition, once a magistrate's 1-year term of office expires, he will have to wait 10 years before serving in that office again. So again, this is a kind of limiting of the power of a person. You only have one year and then you have to wait 10 years. So almost you have to establish your power. But again, when the law practice becomes more and more professional, that law has to be relaxed. Otherwise, you don't have sufficient people to run the magistrate. So here, our judges is a profession. They hold the positions when they are capable, I suppose. But for example, in the United States, the highest court judges is also by life.
Yeah.
Once they are appointed, they have that position for life. And that is a very powerful position.
Yeah, it's scary, really.
Yes, given their political affiliations. The consuls were the highest ranking ordinary magistrate. Each consul also served 1 year. Consuls have supreme power in both civil and military matters. While in the city of Rome, the consuls are the head of the Roman government. They would preside over the Senate and the Assembly. While aboard, each consul would command an army. His authority aboard would be really absolute. Again, military and political power is combined into one. every 5 years, 2 censors were elected for an 18-month term, during which they would conduct a census. During the census, they would enroll citizens in the Senate or purge them from the Senate. So who can vote, who cannot vote, who can come in, who cannot come in, becomes and then it establishes the term of office to 5 years now. So every 5 years, then they will purge or change the council. So it's almost like our voting system now. So we started to see there's a lot of things which happen in Rome is brought into today's political system. So our political system is actually quite obviously evolved from the Rome system. So during the first 2 centuries of its existence, the Roman Republic expanded through a combination of conquest and alliance from central Italy to the entire Italian peninsula. And then by the following century, it included North Africa, Spain, and what's now called southern France. 2 centuries after that, towards the end of the 1st century BC, it included the rest of the modern France, Greece, much of the Eastern Mediterranean. But this time, the internal tensions lead to a series of civil wars, climaxing with the assassination of Julius Caesar, which ended the establishment of the Roman Empire. So it get expanded. I think at that time, the Rome's political system is very advanced, and therefore it has a very powerful mechanism to actually both congress and take in alliance. So the Roman Empire Republic expand. Then obviously this system cannot continue forever. So it had to change it. So it changed into a empire ruled by a king or emperor. The 500 years Roman Republic has been destabilized through a series of civil wars. Several events mark the transition from republic into empire, including Julius Caesar's appointment as a perpetual dictator, and then the Battle of Actium and the granting of the honorific Augustus to the Octavian by the Roman Senate. So eventually, again, power get concentrated. Remember, in the republic, the power is very much limited. For example, magistrate once every 10 years, etc. But now, eventually, somebody concentrate all the power onto himself. The post-republic period characterized by an autocratic form of government and a large territory holdings around the Mediterranean Sea in both Europe, Africa, and Asia. And honorific is a title that conveys esteem and respect when used in addressing or referring to a person. Today, we also address our magistrate or judge as your honor. So I think that is similar in that case. That becomes a honorary, a higher ranking. The 2 centuries of the empire was a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity. It reached its greatest expanse during the reign of Taja in the 3rd century. The empire underwent a crisis that threatened its existence, but was reunified and stabilized under the emperor Aurelian and Diocletian. And then Christians rose to power in the 4th century, during which time a system of dual rule was developed in the Latin West and the Greek East. After the collapse of the central government in the West in the 5th century, the eastern half of the Roman Empire continues as what would later be known as the Byzantine Empire. Mm. So we don't have a lot of information about the empire, but the next interesting is look at the 8 reasons of the Rome's collapse. First of all, is external, okay, invasion by barbarian tribes. As it expand, this expansion typically will take over more and more territories as we see that the power concentrated in Rome. So all these Chian states, people had less power, and so there is a kind of extortion of wealth in Rome from the Chian states. The Chian state obviously contribute to the riches in the Rome, and that will cause a rebellion. Okay, and then of course the stripes surrounding the boundary of the Roman Empire will be fearful of the Roman invasion, and therefore there is always tensions, and therefore from the Romans' point of view, the barbarian tribes will invade the Roman Empire. But from the barbarian tribes' point of view, you can expand, why can't I? That's number one. That's number one. And number two, if I don't expand into more powerful, I may be eaten by you, and that becomes your Chian state. So there is always a tension like that happening. So that is one factor of an empire. Mm-hmm. The second is economy. Constant war, overexpanding has significantly lightened the imperial coffers, and oppressive taxation and inflation have widened the gap between the rich and the poor. Again, that is very typical. At those times, you cannot print money. Money is precious gold. So their Roman coins, the gold content has been diluting. And as a result, there is a inflation kicking in. So when the inflation kicks in, the government, what the government could do? Apply more tax. So apply to whom? Obviously the poor. The rich will not apply more tax to them. And remember, the rich are in control of the Senate and have good relationship with the emperor. And therefore, all these burdens go to the lower class. And then again, like any expanding economy, the wealth will go to the rich people in more shares, in more proportion than going to the poor. So the inequality increase. So in terms of economy, there are trouble in that sense. And then another cause is the size of the empire. As those days, we don't have communication of today. So when the empire becomes larger and larger, the communication becomes longer and longer, and therefore the governing is becoming more difficult. And therefore the Eastern Empire, which was not originally the Roman Empire, will try to establish its own governments, and therefore it will split into the Eastern Empire as well as the rest of the Rome. So there is another issue with the size of the empire. Overexpansion and military overspending. As you want to keep your empire running, you need power, you need military power, and therefore you increase your spending in military. Again, that feedback into the economy. You are trying to get as much money as you can to run the country. So when the expansion of military becomes a major cost to run the country, then you have a problem running the country, because other services has to be sacrificed in order to maintain your army. Corruption is always the case when you have people in power, you will have corruption. So the government corruption, and then corruption also lead to political instability. And when you have power concentrated into the emperor, so the emperor, being an emperor is a very risky business because other people also want to be emperor. So you are always in fear of being assassinated. So we will have that political instability there as well. And then eventually arrival of a very large group of people with sufficient power, and the arrival of the Huns and the migration of the barbarian tribes. And therefore, it's have a significant impact onto the stability of the empire. So whether that is the final nail of the coffin, we don't know. But anyway, that is a very important element as well. And Christianity, as I said, the Roman Empire started to be a polytheist religion. They believe in all kinds of gods. But eventually, Christianity, a monotheist religion, started to spread among the common people. So that religion is trying to seek political power, and therefore eventually becomes a dominant political power. And then Rome have to adopt Christianity as its official empire religion. So the Edict of Milan legalized Christianity in 313, and it later becomes the state religion in 380. This decrease ended centuries of persecution, but they also eroded the traditional Roman values system. Christianity displayed the polytheistic Roman religion, which viewed the emperor as having a divine status, and also shifted focus away from the glory of the state onto a sole deity. Meanwhile, popes and other church leaders took an increased role in political affairs, further complicating governance. The 18th century historian Edward Gibbon was the most famous proponent of this theory, but his take has since been widely criticized. While the spread of Christianity may have played a small role in curbing Roman civic virtues, most authors, scholars now argue that its influence pale in comparison to military, economic, and administrative factors. So how much influence of the religion on the political system, we don't know. But again, whether religion is a good thing or not, again, subject to circumstances. The allegiance weakening, because as you are now running into economic issues in keeping the army, so the armies obviously had to be weakened in balancing the books, so to speak, and therefore your defense abilities also decrease with the weakening of its army, and therefore allow the barbarians to sack the city of Rome and brought down the Western Empire. Lessons to be learned. Is there any lessons to be learned? And I'm not going to draw the lessons now. I'm just referring to an article. Okay. Actually, I think I referred to some articles, but today we can look at what are the causes of the collapse of the Roman Empire, and try to think about our current political system. Is our political system like the Roman system at the verge of collapse? That's one very interesting question to ponder.
Mm.
At those times, it's geographical, and therefore we have the barbarians. But today we are globalized. So what is the equivalent of barbarians today? Is is Chinese the barbarian? To the European political system, American, Western Europe, etc., is almost a similar political system, but we have another political system quite different from the Western system, growing in abilities, growing in influence, which is Chinese. So is that the Hung which bring down the Roman Empire, or is that this time is the Chinese bringing down the American Empire? We don't know. And that another issue is, of course, once the empire collapsed, what happened to the region which previously was controlled by the empire? In the Europe, it goes into the so-called Dark Ages. That means the government services is broken down, and therefore the government is not able to provide some very important social service, and therefore everything collapsed down. And here is a article back in 2012, talk about the striking parallels between the US and the Roman Empire. So again, that is another reason why I spent the whole meeting on Roman Empire, because there are so many parallels here.
Yeah, I agree.
So if you like, you can go there and check out that article. Yeah, it is a two-part article. The one I'm linking to is part 1. And then once you get the part 1, you will be able to part 2. The article itself is about 8 pages long if you print it out. So not too long and not too short, but there's a good reading there. And they, based on the 8 factors that caused the collapse of Roman Empire, they compare that with the parallels with what's happening in the United States. Okay, so that's it for today.
That was good fun. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of that was new to me, really. I'd never bothered to look. So. Okay. Yeah, no, it's really good. Really good.
Yeah, today, I think today we had something to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you so much. And then we'll see you in China today.
Okay.
Bye.
See ya.
Yeah.